Mission orders priority Omega 10, Specialist Agent Ghost 4 activated, please confirm. A synthetic masculine voice awakens the occupant of the private, single-person bunk. Mission profile: gain access to the target vessel. Conduct intelligence collection operations. Capture the vessel and all technologies aboard, or scuttle if necessary. Above all else, the target vessel and any technology it possesses cannot be allowed to escape your custody. Any and all means necessary are authorized for this assignment. Mission will activate immediately once the asset is in place. Further brief will be made available on mission. A blur of motion streaked down the slightly upwardly sloped corridor of the space station. At this time of the shift cycle, there were few people in this area to collide with, which left the way clear. The thunderous pounding of boots on the metal flooring warned anyone to think twice before interrupting this person. This was the kind of priority mission that left no time for subtlety or hindrance by some roaming crew member. The still wet, crimson-red hair flowed from the woman's head as she ran at full speed towards her objective. The skin-tight, void-safe underclothes she wore under her bulky EVA suit did restrict her movement ever just slightly. The polymer fabric most of her clothing was made from was being stretched to their limit. She held a deep hope that success in this mission may finally lead to a promotion and a deployment anywhere but this station at the very edge of the asteroid belt. A quick right and an even quicker left brought her to a ladder leading down towards an already open airlock. With all the quickness of the sprint here, the blur of black reinforced fabrics and curly red hair slipped down the ladder and through the airlock. With each rung she passed, she had to strain harder and harder to slow her descent. As she nearly fell into the module, she grabbed the hatch to the airlock and pulled it shut behind her. With the airlock now sealing itself, the lightly damp mess of hair was quickly wrapped into a bun and a helmet was locked into place without concern for the few stray hairs that may get unfortunately shortened. As the HUD startup sequence played on the inside of the helmet's visor, the now fully sealed and flight-ready woman plopped into her seat and strapped herself in to start the initialization sequence. The belt had been clicked into the place, the lighting inside the module suddenly changed and gave the detach warning. Just as abruptly as the day had started, the transit module detached itself, was flung from the spinning station, and initiated its high-output ion engines. After the seat of the transit module shifted into the flight position, the lone passenger shimmied around to try to get comfortable in her seat-turned couch. Dismissing the launch data from her HUD, it was time to start digging into this mission brief. The flight system's ETA showed a countdown of just over 18 hours, which meant there would be plenty of time to study the brief, formulate a plan, and possibly even take a short nap. The short pages of text, few scanner readouts, and even lower resolution pictures being projected HUD implied there was something wrong here. A confused, and mildly concerned, expression became visible as a faint reflection on the inside of the visor. Major Sarah McCaffrey tried to wrap her muddled mind around the brief in front of her. She had been woken up in the middle of a particularly good dream by this top priority mission notification. And having been awake for less than 10 minutes after only a few short hours of sleep, she knew she probably wasn't in the best state of mind for reading this level of classified information. However, it only took 20 minutes to read through the entire mission brief, even in her half-asleep state. And that was concerning. She couldn't believe they just sent her out here with only this. Did her superiors really send her on a mission to intercept, board, and secure a station orbiting Jupiter by herself? And with only little to work from? Without any specific information on who would be on that station, what capabilities they had, or even what exactly they were doing all the way out here. All she knew for sure was that this was a relatively small spin station, with unknown modification, in an elliptical orbit around Jupiter. Though the orbit brought it through high energy and radiation zones, the station itself also seemed to be emitting random high-energy bursts. Whoever it was and whatever they were doing, Sarah just said a silent prayer that they would adhere to the gentleman's agreement and not just disable her little transit module to leave her stranded out there. This kind of mission was how good agents got lost to the void. If it came down to it, she would be okay for a week or so by rationing, but it would not be a fun experience. Rather than focus on any of that, she stared at the countdown timer ticking away in the top corner on her visor. There was still over 17.5 hours left before intercept and about 5 hours until the retroburn to put her in an orbit alongside her target. Even with the mild forces of acceleration pulling at her body, catching up on some sleep wouldn't be impossible. With a small bit of effort to push the recline button on her chair's controls, the chair slowly flattened out further to provide a more comfortable resting position. She contemplated taking off her helmet, getting something to eat from the rations, and drying out her still slightly damp hair. However, the comfort of the chair and the sleepiness in her eyes kept her down as she slowly faded back to sleep. System alert. Launch detected from UNEMSS Gibraltar on intercept course with Mars Gov RSS and Bode Y Espen contact estimated in 17 hours. A synthetic feminine voice almost seemed to whisper in the comfortably sized private room. Encrypted QTM sent to Mars Gov IA for tactical package update. Awaiting response and will advise when updated. After several moments passed, a low, quiet, near animalistic groan was muffled by a pile of slightly shifting weighted blankets. In another corner of this relatively small room, a dark, brindled head with one blue and one yellow eye arose from under another pile of cloth. Sheepishly, it looked around for a moment, only quickly tucked its head back below the covers. The fluff of gray feathers perched in yet another corner of the room didn't seem to even register the sound of the intercom as its body slowly and rhythmically expanded and contracted with its deep breaths. 6 more hours of near silence filled the room. All that could be heard was the distant hum of machinery, a slight buzz of what sounded like static, and the almost inaudible trickle of water. Several 100,000 miles away, a deep red storm of unimaginable proportions raged across the pseudo-surface of a planet so large that, even at this distance, one would like they could reach out and touch. The crackling lightning on its surface and various shades of reds and oranges dances among each other in a silent ballet. System alert, priority incoming encrypted QTM transmission from Mars Gov IA. The synthetic, feminine voice once again broke the silence. Mission status, cleared for immediate launch on predetermined vector Alpha 45.239C. UNE vessel course has not been altered. Estimated time to arrival, 11 HRS. Subcommand Anti-Prashut requesting immediate contact response and is waiting on this encrypted line for confirmation. Repeat Subcommandant Prashut requesting immediate contact response and is waiting on this encrypted line for confirmation. Repeat Subcom. I get it, roared an angry voice as the mountain of weighted blankets shifted and began to topple. Out erupted a lightly tanned face, heavily obscured by what could only be described as a disaster of hair and an equally chaotic beard. Would you like me to connect you to the Subcommandant now? The contact response request is of the top priority. Asked the shipboard AI. Though its name, roughly translated into English, meant sloppy drunk raccoon, and despite the captain's best effort to reprogram it, this ship's AI could only be a resolute professional in all of its tasks. Can I at least take a shower and drink some coffee first? The now quite disheveled-looking man reached over and pushed the button on a console just outside his sleeping nook while letting out an exasperated whine. Mars Gov Intelligence Agency priority contacted response override accepted. Cheeky fucking see, the man whispered under his breath as he slowly plied himself from the mass of weighted blankets and warm bed. Bode Y Espen, this is Eagle's Landing, how copy over. One pleasant synthetic replaced another far harsher one being played through the intercom. The quantum tunneling messenger relayed its data packets nearly instantly across hundreds of millions of miles of space. These transmissions utilized a networked system of quantum entangled particles which, though millions of times faster than the speed of light, had incredibly limited bandwidth. They could really only transmit small packets of information while using tremendous amounts of power. It was much more of a fusion-powered instant telegraph system than anything resembling other modern communications systems. However, nothing could beat its speed or resistance to interception and encryption cracking. Howdy. It looks a bit cloudy with a chance of rain today, though pleasant. How are you on this fine day? While playing up his accent for comedic effect, the coded phrase indicated that nothing was amiss and the mission was continuing as expected. In fact, the drive had almost finished charging and the last of the course calculations would be done within a few hours. When was the last time you checked your comms or sensor systems, Mick? You are not clean and clear. You have a bogey incoming. We need you back in Mars orbit and within our protective grid before the feds can get anything from you. I don't care if you want to do more research, your mission is over. If you get harassed, fuck the gentleman's agreement and get home, inject ICEEP by any means necessary. Before there was even a chance to respond, the ship AI chimed in, contact response ended. Welp, as Mick jumped up from his sleeping nook and clapped his hand. The loud sound caused the pair of creatures in the left and right corners of the room to shoot their heads up and give the man stares of disapproval. Oh, don't give me that. The man quickly retorted, I know you were both awake this whole time. And you can't pretend you weren't. However, the stares continued. Fine. You can go back to sleep, but I'm gonna run lockdown procedures. I'll come get you when I have your breakfast ready. At that, both of the animals put their heads back down to continue their rests. Silently, as to not disturb his companions further and arouse more of their ire, Mick slowly proceeded with getting up. Extracting his now ready coffee from the panel next to him, he began walking to the bathroom unit to get ready for this hopefully historic day. He couldn't help but wonder who his surprise guest would be and how best to deal with them. There were really only so many agents that the tyrants had out far enough for this fast of a response time. And, even if he didn't necessarily like the idea, the gentleman's agreement being thrown out meant he had even more ways he could deal with them if things got out of hand. Primary deceleration burn complete. Entering final approach vector. Relative distance to target 20 kilometers. Relative velocity 25 meters per second. Estimated time to target 13 minutes, 20 seconds. The voice from Sarah's transitor called out. Computer, initiate protocol. Puppy dog eyes. Having spent the past few hours working through various plans, Sarah had finally settled on one of her tried and true infiltration methods. Set main thruster to before she could finish her commands, the ship AI interrupted her. Alert! Incoming high-energy projectiles detected. Estimated impact in 432. For the first time in a long time, true fear shot through the Major's veins as her transitor module rocked violently. The once pure white and vibrant lighting which had graced the small cabin was suddenly replaced with a dull crimson hue. Warning. Catastrophic damage detected in primary engine array. Main thrusters disab. Before the automated warning message had a chance to complete its prophecy of disaster, the transitor rocked again, though not quite as violently as the first impact. Warning. Damage detected to communication systems. Long-range comms and QTM array have been disabled. Emergency distress beacon failure. Calculating recommendations. The computerized warning was incredibly dire. Oh no, the word softly escaped from her lips. This was the one thing anyone who had ever been in space feared above all else, losing both your engine and comms millions of miles away from the nearest person who was willing and capable of helping. This was what the gentleman's agreement between the UNE and Mars Gov was made to avoid. What kind of horrible person would do this another? If push really came to shove in space, there was a standing order that agents, handlers, and assets would be treated humanely. Even the most radical actors in both the UNE and Mars Gov played by these rules. Despite everything, leaving someone to die in the blackness of space by either starvation, dehydration, or asphyxiation was just wrong. Incoming short-range IR comm signal detected. The quick chime for the ship AI broke Sarah out of her daze. Whoever it was, hopefully they would be willing to let her surrender. All she could do was say a silent prayer that this station's crew wouldn't do anything to her when she inevitably was at their mercy. Put it through on the main screen and send back audio and visual. I want these fucks to look me in the eye if they decide to leave me to drift. Before she even had a chance to realize the connection had been made, an oddly familiar-sounding voice was booming through her speakers as a face started to appear through the static. Sic Semper. Tyron, the voice trailed off as the face came into focus. Sarah and Mick's eyes locked through the camera feeds while a torrent of emotions flooded both of their faces. A pair of green eyes locked with a pair of hazel eyes, one of which had a metallic sheen. Sarah's already panicking mind began to race even faster. Out of the billions of people in the Martian-aligned regional sovereignties, why did it have to him? She thought to herself. The last time Sarah saw Mick was almost 4 years ago. And, more importantly, with the amount of blood she saw splattered against the wall and floor as she was pulled through the breach by the extraction team, she thought she would never see his face again. His left arm had been turned to a chunky mist, left orbital sock torn out by a piece of shrapnel, and close to a liter of blood had been sprayed across the room. That horrifying sight was the last thing Sarah saw as the team forcefully exfiltrated her from the remote weapons testing facility on Mars. And yet here he was, with expression quickly changing from one of confused shock to one of excited amusement. Well, if it ain't spooky Sarah. What in the tarn hell you doing all the way out there? Trying to blow me up again? As he spoke, he was slowly allowing laughter to slip between his words. The deep redneck drawl of his voice was laid on so thick that it made his suddenly playful tone seem genuine. What? The last word was a shout. Looking and feeling as if she had just seen a ghost, Sarah could barely stammer out a reply. Though seeing a familiar face would, in most cases, bring about a sigh of relief for someone in Sarah's current circumstance, the first thought that crossed her mind was, maybe drifting off into space would actually be better than whatever the hell this is. Sarah couldn't bring herself to say anything in response to Mick's attempt at trying to make a joke. The reality of the situation was barely able to set in as she was flooded with memories of the past. Mick was barely containing his laughter as he started reaching slightly out of view of the communicator's camera. Through his childish giggles, Sarah could hear him pushing a few buttons on a console. Not knowing what was happening, she let her training override her mental shock. Forcing herself to snap out of her daze, she blurted out the obvious question. So, are you just gonna leave me to drift, or are you gonna let me dock up so I won't die out here? Her Highland Scottish accent shook slightly with the weight of the situation. The scorned and scarred former lovers seemed to not to be homicidally angry at the moment. She considered playing up her accent that he had seemed rather fond of might keep him in a cooperative mood. The noise quickly escaped from Mick's lips as he leaned back into view of the camera and shot Sarah, and I can't believe you just asked me that look. The obviously overblown redneck accent calmed quite a bit into something far more neutral. I'm not letting that UNE shit can anywhere near my dock. Leaning back out of frame, he continued, Nah, I'm gonna send out a drone to pick you up and bring you to the airlock. Don't bring nothing with you. Just your void suit. Don't bother with EVA gear. I don't fucking trust you, and I'm still not over the eye or arm. Or broken heart. He paused for a moment before saying that last part. Letting his synthetic eye look straight through the camera and into Sarah's soul. Don't push your luck. You know these suits only have about 10 minutes of air in them without the EVA gear, right? Sarah replied hesitantly. Please tell me your drones and airlock are fast enough. Please tell me your drones are fast enough? The mocking tone was clear. Yes, my drones are fast enough. You'll be fine. I just want to time this right and get you on board as quick as I can. I'm already all set up for my test run and I ain't about to miss my window. If I gotta spend another goddamn 3 weeks repositioning all my sensor buoys, I'll be pissed. There was a slight pause as Mick seemed to stare at something off-screen for a moment, then glanced back. I'll tell you what you need to know when you get here. The drone is already on its way, so look out for its lights. The second it gets there, you punch out and it'll bring you to the airlock. I'll see you when I see you. With a wink of the synthetic eye, and the wave of a hand that shouldn't be there, the line was dead. Quickly, Sarah's mind began to rush through any and every plan and backup plan she had in her mental inventory. There had to be some way to salvage this mess, otherwise her command would probably think she turned. Maybe she could conceal a weapon and overpower him? A logic plague to take over the ship AI on a concealed drive? Something? Anything? No, everything that came to mind would be detected, and, at best, he would just leave her locked in the airlock till they arrived back at a Mars-Gov station. At worst, Sarah didn't bother to linger on those thoughts. However, a strange feeling in her gut told her that she couldn't live with herself if she betrayed Mick again. Especially if he didn't just leave her to drift after everything that had happened between them. From what she could see on the screen, he almost seemed glad to see her. If she were in his shoes, things would be much different. Out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw a light through the transitor's windows that brought her back to reality. At this point, she decided the mission was over and the only thing she could do was stay alive. Whether she liked it or not, the man she had tricked into falling in love with her, used for information and espionage, and then ultimately betrayed, was her only chance at mercy. She just had to trust that Mick was actually going to save her. Trust that he wasn't planning on doing anything to her in revenge for what she did to him. Trust that he was a better person than she was. Regardless of any trust issues, if she didn't do what he said, then she knew her chances of survival were essentially zero. All she could do was hope and pray that she would make it home to see the clouds over Scotland again. Within a few moments, the distant, flickering lights had fully come into view, signaling that the drone had arrived. With a deep breath, Sarah put her void suit in exposure mode, double-checked the seals on her helmet, and said a final prayer. Not even a second after Sarah hit the emergency escape hatch and was sucked out into the vacuum of space, the drone had safely, though not too gently, collected her in its manipulator arms and was rushing her to the airlock of the Espen. The relative distance and speed between her and Mick's station really weren't all that far off now. Despite this, the drone was accelerating at quite a clip. As the self-sustaining, spin-gravity station from her mission brief began to come into view, blackness of space and vibrant hues of Jupiter, she was at a loss for words. The brief Sarah had been given had woefully underestimated the degree of customization done to this station. In fact, from this angle, it could hardly even be called a station anymore. It was a full-on ship. Throughout the past 150 years of large-scale production, nearly every single space habitat built in the solar system had two primary features: artificial spin gravity, which varying between 4 and 10 meters per second squared, and a dedicated aquaponic segment to provide a whole system life support unit for the crew. They all also lacked one very specific feature: an independent and dedicated main propulsion system. Every station did have advanced reaction control systems which were powerful enough to help maintain simple orbits. However, for anything more than just maintaining an orbit, it just was simply more efficient to use tugs. Where stations were stationary, void transitor modules and trans-median shuttles provided transit between stations, colonies, and Earth. Such ships always lacked any sort of spin gravity systems, and all life support systems were artificial. Purpose-built transitors would be used to move the stations from where they were assembled to the location where they would be commissioned. It simply didn't make sense to build a station with an engine if that engine would only be used once a decade, if it was even used a second time. Because of this, no station could truly be said to have a bow or stern, since such a concept could hardly apply to a symmetrical cylinder or a series of near-identical ring segments connected along a central shaft. Just as Sarah and the drone got close enough to distinguish a thruster array of 3 larger and 6 small bell housings surrounding a central hole of some sort, the drone quickly rotated around and began a rather harsh deceleration burn. Turning her head around to take in the rest of this strange vessel, she could barely recognize any standard of the modules on this side of the station. Those bell housing appeared to be connected to a surprisingly large stellarator reactor core through a series of seemingly ramshackle tubing. The cobbled-together nature of this section of the station became more and more apparent as Sarah's gaze moved on to what could only be described as a nearly 40-meter-wide bundle of wires, tubes, hoses, and containment units. Next in line was a hellforge. "Why are ya out here trying to make metallic hydrogen, ya fucking lunatic?" Sarah screamed out without even thinking about it. Metallic hydrogen was the same stuff Mick had tried to use as propellant in his light mass gun. It was beyond dangerous and incredibly unstable when not confined. Piercing the near-utter silence of the void, Sarah swore she could hear what sounded like a faint yet deep chuckle come through the comms in her helmet. Before she could respond, however, her eyes fell onto the next section of this ship. Though Sarah knew what a Hellforge was after spending so much time around Mick and hearing him babble on and on about them, she had no idea what this next segment was. It looked like two large, but not quite as large as the first, stellarators were positioned on either side of some kind of array. The design of the array was so alien to her that she was having trouble even guessing as to what it was for. What was clear was that it needed an absolutely insane amount of power if it required two dedicated stellarators. At this point, she was actually getting kind of scared about what kind of suicidal redneck science experiment Mick had thought up this time. When her eyes were finally able to pull themselves away from the near-eldritch concoction of engineering, she was almost relieved to see the rest of the modules look relatively standard. Most definitely modified in strange ways, but still standard. Though the backbone of this station would normally utilize the cylinder-style system for habitation, near the front of the station sat a few ring segments connected by some tubes every so many meters. None of the rings, however, were spinning. Seeing a spin station not spinning was usually cause for concern, unless that station was about to be repositioned. Remembering how large the engines were and what seemed to be powering them, it was probably a good idea to not have the station spinning if Mick was planning on moving it. A sudden deceleration and re-acceleration sent Sarah towards an almost standard-looking docking and airlock module. The jarring motion was enough to disorient her for a moment before she could see what she was moving towards. She was now staring at a trans-median shuttle docked and clamped onto the front docking station, with its pointed nose forward and giving the impression of a bridge. Though it was relatively small compared to the rest of the station, likely only able to hold a dozen passengers, including 4 in the cockpit area, it completed the aesthetic and turned this station into an actual ship. At the bow was a bridge, and at the stern, nearly 600 meters away, was a massive engine. Blazoned on the side of the shuttle was a caricature of a raccoon in a bikini chugging a bottle with 3 X's on the side. Not only was it the largest ship she had ever seen, it already had art and a name. Just as quickly as the drone had rounded the corner towards the airlock and bridge, it decelerated again as it released Sarah from its grasp with a light shove. Before she could even comment on how much of an asshole Mick was for programming the drone to ragdoll her like this, she was bracing herself for impact. There were still a few meters between her and the airlock, but she covered that distance in roughly a second. Flying through the already open airlock hatch, she impacted the surprisingly well-cushioned inner airlock door and let out a soft oof sound. She had been trained on how to reduce impact forces, and the door was well padded, but the sudden stop almost knocked the wind out of her. And considering how little wind there was left in the suit, that could have been very bad. However, as she looked back, the airlock was already almost closed.